Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the ID5 podcast. Today we're going to take a deep dive into the world of connected TV, video, and plenty of other things with my guest for the day, Tal Chalozin, who's the CTO and co-founder of Innovid. Tal, welcome.
Yay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Matt, and thanks for having me, ID5.
No problem. We're great to have you. We have had different episodes with different players, and we've talked about like mobile apps and kind of web and stuff. But like you're the first kind of video TV, connected TV professional we're getting. So like, yay, there you go. But the topic is the same, right? We're doing this series of podcasts and webcasts really to kind of try and take a step back and think like long term. What we're doing with digital advertising, right, above and beyond the little bumps on the roads, and the activity and the innovation that seems to be like on a bit of a constant, change is the only constant in our industry, right? So, but if you look at it like long term, advertising is really what's powering content and services on the internet. The access to content and services on the internet is paid for by advertising, so it's really important, and it's really important that we build this in a way that sustains content and services over the years. So I guess my first question for you and for all my guests is really like, do you think we're in a sustainable kind of trajectory? Do we think we're building a sustainable industry? And if yes or if no, like what should we do to make this happen better?
Sure. I've listened. I had the pleasure of listening to a lot of your glamorous guests that came ahead of me. So I listened to a few of those answers. But I'll just say I'll try to be a little different than others, hopefully, to entertain at least your audience. But I'll say that. In general, I think that yes, it's definitely sustainable in a way that the future. Let's put it that the future. Fast forward 10 years, 15 years from now, advertising will take a significant part as the business model of the internet. That my take. Marketers will want and need to insert themselves in and around content, whatever they define as premium, in the future. So 100% it's going to be here. Will it look exactly like it is right now? I don't think so. I think a lot of things will change, and as you said, the beautiful part of our industry, and this is what pays the rent to a lot of us, is that things evolve constantly, technologically, legislation-wise, dynamics, business models. So many things are changing, but the core elements of including advertising as a core business model for the web, 100% will be there for the future. I'm just going to touch on a point that I'm sure we're going to touch many times. We at Innovid, we created a software platform to work with the buy side of marketing, with media buying agencies and brands powering this transformation from linear television into connected television. And we started a company 14 years ago without really knowing anything about what I'm talking about right now, or even how to spell CPM. But you can see in the sign behind me, we put the word, we called Innovid innovation in video, because we truly believe in innovation. So to kind of cut a long story short about the sustainability and everything, we definitely think that constant innovation is the only way, the only way forward. Is that we need to keep on changing, and there's nothing that we've done in the past that needs to be the way of the future.
Yeah, it's interesting that you started Innovid. You said 14 years ago, right? Like
Correct.
For most people, connected television is or digital video and is like a recent phenomenon. And when you look at like dollars moving from traditional mostly display advertising or social media advertising into TV, what did you do for the previous 13 and a half years?
So I'll give you some facts. So first of all, streaming has been around for a very long time. Netflix started streaming, moved away from envelopes in 2008. So streaming has been around for a long time. Like everything, you dream faster than things happen, but when they happen faster than you thought that the revolution will happen. So this is, and this saying is true here. So we started back in 2007-ish with the kind of the dream that television will move to the internet. So we looked at YouTube, we looked at Hulu was kind of in inception mode that time, and it was kind of obvious that that a lot of things that migrated into digital and changed significantly through that, the same thing will happen to video or to television as an experience, not television as a device, but television as an experience of watching content. And we didn't know exactly how it would look, but we said we want to be in there because we think that television is one of this unique product that everyone loves, and it doesn't matter your social economical stage or where you are in the world or your age. Everyone knows to laugh or cry or enjoy any type of content. And we thought that this experience will change significantly. We want to build a technology to power that. So in the early days, it was online video, short clips, YouTube, and the things that only kind of a few cool kids were doing. It's definitely not mainstream. It was an uphill battle. In the world, connected television was not really a thing back then. It was mostly people called it digital video or online video. In 2014, which is also feels ages ago, but 2014, we did our first deal with Roku, which was an unknown company back then. We did our first deal with Roku to build an SDK for connected television and to build advertising engine that now powers Roku, but to be a big part of that. And we continue. This is again part of the innovation part. And back then it looked like a very odd bet on a world that no one knows will happen. Clearly, it paid dividends many years later. But we've been investing in the CTV space for many years now.
I think one of the kind of the constant, right, is that the growth of usage growth, right? Like I don't have numbers in mind, but I'm guessing like audience moving to kind of digital television, right, as an experience, correct, as you say, not necessarily as a device, and that's probably the best kind of guarantee that the sustainability of what we're building, right, because people are there anyway, and eventually, like the marketing investment are going to follow eyeballs. They're going to follow people, and as people are moving more and more
100%.
towards, and so just on this, maybe the other. One of the counter argument that you hear is the counter argument of like subscription, right? And I think in TV it's probably maybe even more true than in other areas, right? Because there's a lot of like big players who are kind of in control of a lot of the content. There's less diversity, there's less fragmentation, right? How do you see this kind of the cohabitation, the coexistence of ad-supported versus subscriber based? What have you observed over the past few years, and what do you think is going to be the trend going forward?
Yeah. So I'll end with a short answer, and then I can backtrack it and give you the full one. But at the end, definitely, I think that advertising will play a massive role. I'm clearly biased, but I'll explain why. What am I basing it on? Advertising will play a massive role in the future of television, and it would look. Once the dust settled several years out, it would look very similar to what television is right now, which is a hybrid model industry. So people do pay some form of a subscription. You pay your basic cable or satellite, regardless your accent and regardless where you are. And also the vast majority of content being watched is also funded by advertising. So this hybrid model will probably be the way of the future. Like any type of innovation, early days always more affluent side, more early adapter comes in, and then someone need to pay more fees, and it looks like it's a heavy subscription-based industry, but tides are definitely shifting. Something interesting happening this year, just to give you some, it's coming from the United States, but some stats is that 2021 is the year. And it's already happening. This is not a forward-looking statement, but it's the year that there were more households watching connected television right now in the United States than watching pay TV television. So right now there's about 89, give or take, million homes watching that are addressable through ad-supported. I mean, not about streaming. Streaming, there's way more.
Yeah,
but I mean,
more,
ad-supported television. So there's about that number of households watching ad-supported television, and much less than that if you aggregate all the pay TV operator reporting numbers. We're shy of 80 million subs. So it's not an emerging market. This market's already emerged. But your point earlier totally stands, similar to this Mary Meeker slide from years ago about how audience are moving faster. That was about mobile, but moving faster than monetization. Same thing happens in television right now. This revolution is not driven by a marketer, not by a walled garden, not by anything. Driven by viewers going out, consumers going out, buying connected television, buying a Roku, buying an Xbox, subscribing to Hulu or Disney Plus or HBO Max or whatever service that is, and enjoying that content.
I'm interested in understanding the dynamics, because I think the kind of the online world, right, from an advertising standpoint, is very, very consolidated around Google and Facebook, and then you have like a millions of like small media owners, right?
Correct.
I think if my understanding of connected TV, and then correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's slightly less concentrated. You don't have like two super dominant player, but it's also less fragmented, right? And you don't have like millions of content producers, because in the end you need to have an infrastructure, you need to be able to produce content. It's kind of more expensive and everything. So how do you think it changes the dynamic? Is it a more like a more kind of balanced ecosystem? Or is it a more difficult ecosystem because you've got like less innovation? Like how do you compare and contrast the two worlds?
In terms of difficulty or opportunity, I think it depends on who you are. You're a content producer, you're a marketer, you're a tech provider. But first of all, facts-wise, and then I'll get to what does it make. I think you're 100% correct, and the dynamic you just described is maybe the most important thing to understand about the world of, or the future world of television, is that it's not a winner takes all market, not even a winner takes most market. There is no Google, like the search equivalent of television. There's no the equivalent of social in television. And there are a few companies, I can again name it. Amazon has a massive share here. Google has a big share here. Samsung has a decent sized share. Roku has a very large share. And there are a few. I'm not talking about thousands or not even hundreds. Disney company as well is a big player here. But there are multiple players in this space, but that dynamics means that there's not a single place which all campaigns go to. So again, I'll shift it to a marketer point of view, not to a viewer point of view. What does that mean is that for marketers, I think that that's an amazingly fruitful industry, because there's not a single player that can say, I call all the shots because you must buy what I'm saying, what I'm selling. And also you can get away with only buying what I'm doing. For example, as large as YouTube is and as large as Hulu is, there's no marketer that only buys that inventory in order to access the connected television world, which means that they need to play nicely with others in terms of, we're here to talk data and identity. If you want to do to cut across and you want to manage your frequency, you want to do sequential messaging, you want to understand your reach, there needs to be some way to cut across, because no single player can say just use my identity and that's all.
Yeah, and it probably makes for a more balanced ecosystem, because we see that web publishers, even mobile publishers, right? They're very restricted by what Google on the Chrome side and Apple on the iOS side are deciding. And you started talking about identity. I didn't do it. Don't blame me. You started talking about identity.
Totally fine.
But it's very kind of Google and Apple dominated on the web and on the mobile world. What do you think the situation is going to look like in the next few years in connected TV? Do you think, because both of them have kind of huge stakes in the connected TV world as well, right? Obviously, like Apple with Apple TV, Google with YouTube as a content provider, but also as Android TV, like that has been kind of making some inroads with some kind of TV broadcasters in different parts of the world. So Do you think there's a risk that we're going to a kind of a kind of Google and Apple controlled world in connected television as well, or is the dynamic slightly different than it is or than it has been in on the web and in mobile apps?
So I don't think that there is a risk for a Google-only control or even an Apple-controlled world. So announcement like Google decide to change things in cookies or privacy sandbox or whatever that is, and the massive impact that it has on the web, there is not a single company that can do that for the world of television. There are a few of them. But similar to just to draw an analogy from other computing platforms, it's definitely the world of an operating system is that clearly the king of the hill. The same thing that Microsoft owned the PC era, and Apple and the reason that Apple and Google owned the mobile era is because of the iOS and Android, not because of many other things that they own. And the same thing probably applies to television as well. But it's not a 1 or 2. It's closer to a 9 type of a players. So again, Roku has their own OS. Amazon Fire with Fire TV OS. It is Android based, but it's forked completely. Apple TV or Apple TV OS is clearly a big player. Tizen on the Samsung universe, Smartcast on the Roku, on the Vizio universe are all decent sized players on each and every one of them. And then you go into an Xbox or a PlayStation or a couple of others which are also important. So there are multiple operating systems, but the operating system itself is a super important component. If you want to follow winners, those are probably be the winners of that universe. However, again, the largest one from an advertising standpoint, the largest one of those, say Roku, kind of neck to neck with Amazon Fire, but the general estimation, some of that is Innovid, some is public numbers, is that Roku as an OS, not Roku as a media company, but Roku as an OS represent, call it 30% in round numbers, 32 maybe percent of the overall market, depending on the month, maybe it's a little less than that, of the overall ad time is viewed on their platform. So yes, they're very large, but they're only shy of a third of the market, which is clearly large, and but that's what it is.
Yeah, it's not a 70 or 80%, which is what we're seeing with like the combined market share of Google and Facebook on the web. Does Correct. It mean that it's I mean, so let's consider that we are, I don't know if you want to go draw parallels, but like the development of programmatic, the development of data-driven on the web, probably more advanced than on television. I think we would agree on this, right?
100%.
Okay, so what do you think this kind of different dynamic, less concentration, more, slightly more kind of balanced ecosystem, is it going to change the direction that we're going, or are we going to a data-driven world for television advertising as well? Digital television advertising?
Yeah, I don't think that there's a way. I think almost every one of your previous guests on your podcast said in different ways, different questions, but answered the same thing, is that the future is data-driven. Regardless how you look at it, it makes so much sense. It's ingrained in everything that we do. It's aligned with users, with quality, with business model, with so many things. It must be data-driven. So that's a general theme. So that's 100%. About programmatic, I'll say something interesting about programmatic is that programmatic was invented in the digital world in a demand constrained world where supply was in complete widely available, and then
infinite almost,
infinite supply. So then it allows buyers to get better access to that supply, and then over time drove prices down because it allows better efficiency in the system and supply path optimization and a lot of other part. I feel like at least in this act of connected television, we're in a different world. Maybe it will change, but then this time and in the next few years, we're still in a supply constrained market in connected television. There's heavy demand. So all the move towards programmatic is not about driving prices down at all, which means that it's all about data and it's all about automation and efficiency. It's not about optimizing the cost. So it's optimizing the workflow, not optimizing the cost. And if you look at programmatic in CTV was in, let's call it about 12 months ago, maybe 18 months ago, we're at, let's call it high teens as a percentage of overall ads in connected television. I'm taking YouTube out because YouTube, almost all of YouTube is programmatic, so it's hard. They skew the numbers. But if you take everything but YouTube, we're talking at a roughly 15%, maybe 17% of overall world a year and a half ago. US CTV, was transacted programmatically. That number almost doubled through the last year and a half on a percentage basis, and a lot because through the pandemic, a lot of ratings were down. A lot of marketers wanted to pull dollars out of linear because audience were not there. But also what they realized at the same time is that they want agility. And the beautiful part of programmatic is that it allows me to find exactly the user that will subscribe to my service or will download my app or the one that just churned or whatever that is. 100% Future is data-driven, and I believe that the programmatic will take a much larger share, but in a different way.
Which is a good news, right? Because the biggest mistake that the industry made by rolling out programmatic on the web is like a fully kind of open marketplace, RTB, no control on pricing, no control on buyers. Like, you want to learn to walk before you can run, right? That might be an event, like an eventuality, like maybe the outcome, right? Have a part of your ads that are sold on a fully open, fully transparent basis, but you want to be in control of your premium relationship. And so having more of a supply-driven transition will hopefully help broadcasters and kind of CTV supply providers to be more in control and to kind of open up to kind of new ways of transacting on a more kind of reasonable basis rather than go all in on programmatic like we did on the web. Yeah, absolutely.
100%. And I feel like even in Europe, it's even more extreme than in the US. Clearly, the power struggle between the buy and the sell side in Europe is much more focused on the sell side, where the sell side again, television in general is a very domestic market. So depending on every market, operators and broadcasters makes kind of call the shots in Europe a lot more than it is in the States, and which just continue your line of thinking is that it will be even more extreme than what I'm describing.
Yeah, and that's another difference that I wanted to touch on with you, because web app, mobile app is pretty much a global universe, right? And maybe it became a global universe because of the dynamic we described, but like TV is very much local, right? And how do you see that market structured? Like, is it today? Is it mostly a US? I mean, you're a US company. You're based in the US. Are you very focused on US because that's where the market is, and kind of the rest of the world will potentially come up eventually, but they're not there yet? Or is it already kind of a global marketplace for CTV?
So first of all, I'll answer quickly about Innovid. So Innovid is a completely global company. We operate in north of 90 countries, ad serving on behalf of many of our customers. The beautiful part about large television advertisers is that by and large, a large Fortune 200, Fortune 300 company is a global brand. So all CPG, all automakers, all entertainment clients are all pharmaceutical, are all global brands. So we service them everywhere. When we say we service them, is that we act as the ad server, we act as the analytics provider, we act as the measurement or creative provider. It doesn't mean that the device breakdown is exactly the same. In the US, coming on 50% of overall of the traffic that we deliver on a given month is in connected television. The other 50% is broken up between mobile and PC or Macs. In the outside of the US, the breakdown is much different. The component of connected television is significantly smaller. I think maybe in the UK or several parts of Western Europe, we see that at a bigger penetration, but in many other places in the world, it's close to non-existent. So it's the composition is different, but I think everyone is looking at that revolution, and it's kind of obvious that the internet will make it into the living room and the television will be connected. I'll just say one last thing is that, yes, television historically was very domestic, mainly because of infrastructure, mainly because of, is that, again, television was require a heavy investment in satellite, in cables, and a lot of different things, and was very talent driven. And talent was, in many cases, was very cultural and very domestic in nature. What YouTube or Netflix and Disney Plus proven is that there is a great market for importing and exporting content, and there are ways to create a global media company, which again right now it's mostly in the kind of fringes of overall television viewership, but I believe that will change. So global brands, media brands, I mean, will be able to go cross-border a lot more. And again, Netflix is maybe the best example for that. But the operations side of it is still require quite a lot of work on the ground.
Yeah, the regulation as well, because you mentioned infrastructure, you mentioned content regulations as well, have made this world very kind of localized, right? Because countries have been auctioning out like airwaves for TV operators, and then you've had like all sorts of like content controls, and we're seeing the benefit of like 50 years of regulation now in TV, in the sense that it's migrating at a slower pace, at a more controlled pace, but probably for the better. When you see how the internet has kind of been completely deregulated, and like we didn't have any infrastructure on which to work, legal infrastructure. So hopefully that regulation plays, for once, right? It plays a role for the better for the industry.
No, you're right, but again, at the same time, look at what happened in the last maybe even 2 years right now in the United States. The connected television market just blew up, and it blew up because there is a $30 device that you can go and buy on Best Buy or Target or Walmart, and a Roku or an Amazon Fire or things like that. Plug it into your TV, and then at practically no cost, you get access to content that is actually not bad, and you get quite a lot of stuff in there. So what happened throughout mostly the pandemic and shelter in place is that people were exposed to, actually sport is canceled and a lot of things are canceled, but I have, in the comfort of my living room with one click of my button, I get pretty darn good content. So you're right that regulation prevented things to move super fast, but there's nothing stronger. And again, the internet proven is that when you bring something good in the hand of consumers in the right price, at some point there is an inflection point and things blow up.
Let's talk about user experience and value exchange. I mean, we're firm believers that the position that publishers have had, and the lack of kind of transparency on the value exchange, the lack of explanation of the value exchange, right? People connected and using content and services without really having an explicit transaction with the content provider, and the fact that ad is paying for that, and so that's why we need to understand who you are. We need to be able to target ads to you, because that's how we're paying for the content that you're using, right? All of that kind of value exchange being implicit is now kind of backfiring, and now that we have to make it implicit, because we have in Europe, we have to get consent. In the US, we have to be more transparent about data usage, and kind of that trends towards protecting privacy and understanding kind of who you're sharing data with and everything. We have a lot of kind of backtracking to do to kind of go back to the origin of that relationship and kind of explain it again. Is this the same situation on television, or is the relationship between consumers and kind of content provider broadcasters slightly different? Is it ingrained into like a longer history? Do people understand the value exchange better? And how do you think it positions TV, respective to the web, in terms of like the evolution of the privacy first world that we're entering into?
On one hand, television is a household device, so you don't really target an individual. So from a privacy standpoint, from data collection, and even from login basis, most of the CTV apps are logged in, and they just kept logged in the whole time, and it's a kind of a byproduct of the experience of maybe even having subscription or things like that. So at a high level, yes, you get more connection to the user on that side. So it's maybe a little easier for broadcaster on that side. On the other hand, this is more of a hypothetical point, but my point of view, our point of view, is that when you are on Facebook, like it or not, but the value exchange and the agreement with the user, when I open an account and logged in, there's some type of an understanding that Facebook will use this data one way or the other, not selling it, but will use it and tracking the user experience, and then seeing an ad that follow you throughout the web. It's part of the social contract in digital platforms. When you unbox a TV that you bought on a big box store and you bring it home and then it asks you to create a user, I doubt that most families understand that the same contract exists on television as well. That the television will use technologies like ACR, automatic content recognition, to record every other frame or every couple of seconds that is on the screen. Not for the sake of recording, but for the sake of matching it to a database to know what you're watching. And a lot of those things are still something that, in my mind, there's an uphill climb in terms of market education and consumer education, that those type of tracking follow suit from my phone or from a laptop into the television.
Yeah, I mean, we could argue whether or not consumers really want to know and need to know to accept the value exchange, because in the end, the benefit they're getting is, yes, partly kind of better, more targeted ads, but I don't think they'll value that necessarily. I think what they're getting is the benefit of the content, right? And they want to have access to the content. So whether or not it's useful for them to really understand the intricacies. I think what's different though is that, and what will play in favor of TV is also that it's less of a performance driving medium, right? And so it's the connection between targeting and ads is less obvious, because there's a lot of like ads that are there to reach audiences and broader audiences, right? Exactly, and tell a story. So it's not that annoying little ad that follows you around just because you've been to that one website, right? You'll have a higher level of addressability, which means that there'll be the link between I've done this and so I see that ad is also less obvious.
That is correct. At the same time, you can say that the price per ad is more expensive on those type of mediums, so you need to have some type of a better value. But your point clearly stands.
Yeah, and also what's different is, I mean, you mentioned the fact that it's a household device. It's not a personal or user level device, which means that from an identity standpoint, it's also quite different, right? It's mostly about IP address. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, so this is very, very loaded topic, both regulatory wise, but also technical wise, and happening right now. So one thing is that, yes, the device is a household device. Still, many marketers would like to know a person level measurement. In many cases, it's impossible. In some cases, it's dual people watching on the screen. Actually, on the average case, there's about 1.6 or 1.8 people on average in front of the glass. So co-viewing is something that is byproduct of the product. In terms of the technicalities of IP address, so yes, almost all technology and almost all vendors in the connected television space right now are using IP address as their main ways to track, to do measurement, to calculate household reach, to calculate duplication, to sometimes even to correlate multiple devices on the same access point. And same goes for Innovid. We use IP address. We use it because it's widely available. Every HTTP request has an IP address pegged into it. And the second, because there's the lack of anything else. So some devices like a Roku has a RIDA, a Roku device for a Roku identifier for advertising. Most others, even if they have it, they don't share it. So IP address is easy. We're not hallucinating. It's clear that IP address is not here to stay, meaning that there will be some type of either a regulator intervention, specifically in the United States, or just a common understanding that IP address is not the right way. We already saw with private relay that Apple is doing. Google had some early announcement on IP blindness that they're trying to do as an open source project, part of their privacy sandbox, to try to remove IP address. Again, very early days. Another thing is not widely known, but Amazon on O&O environments on Amazon Fire is starting to mask out IP addresses. So it's becoming harder and harder to use IP address as the identity for the web. So for those reasons, and also, sorry if I'm getting too technical, but the move from IP, at least in the United States, the move from IPv4 to IPv6 introduced other type of privacy elements that makes it harder to use IP addresses. So to cut a long story short, IP address right now is definitely the way that a lot of marketing technologies are used in order to do different calculation, measurement, targeting, and so on. But that's a current metric. It doesn't mean that will be the way of the future. There must be a different way, probably in and around authenticated user will be the way to of the future.
Yeah, and I think it's a general trend, right? There is a reliance to provide too much entropy surface to recipients of bid requests, whether it's on the web or mobile or TV, and in exchange having some form of like safer and more controllable identification method, like an ID5 ID, to put a bit of a sales spin on that discussion. But like, yeah, having some form of currency that is more controllable by the seller than something that is freely transmitted to buyers without much control. So I think that's consistent with what's happening across different channels. Tal, it feels like we could have that discussion forever, but we unfortunately have to cut it short. We should have a second episode. We have to cut it short. I want to leave our listeners and our viewers, because we're also on YouTube, with like a few advice from your side, right? Like we're approaching where we're in the middle of a very kind of interesting, innovating time of change. What do you think are the things to look out for around kind of the notion of identity, obviously, but also around the notion of sustainability of digital advertising? What are the main kind of topics you would advise people to keep an eye on, kind of in the next kind of 12 to 18 months, to stay on top of those constant changes that we're going through?
Sure. I'll try to take it from both angles, from a broadcaster standpoint, one, and then from a marketer standpoint. From a broadcaster standpoint, I think you definitely touched on it, and it's very core to the ID5 business. But I think owning a first-party data or an actual consent-based relationship with the viewer it's not even I would say is nice to have. This is an absolute must.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no other way. And we do talk to a bunch of broadcasters that did not start in that way, and everyone's talking about what about the churn that I'm going to get if I will force people to log into my service. This is the train is out of the station. You need to do it regardless. You're out of business if you don't do that.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Specifically for connected television, but I think it's true for everywhere.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing on the web, right? Like if you have an audience that you can't monetize, why would you want an audience anyway, right?
Correct.
So yeah.
And kind of switching into the marketers, this is a conversation that we hear a lot from marketers, and my bet is that it will happen a lot more, is that even if you're not a performance-based marketer and you are a branding-based marketer, an upper funnel marketer, you still would, more and more marketer will start to look at the kind of bifurcate the web between a known impression or known universe to an unknown universe, and literally will get to a place, and I think the smarter marketer and the more advanced marketer will be able to put a dollar sign against it, saying an impression, even if it's the same, there's no fraud, it's on a very premium broadcaster, there's no doubt that this is a real user, but it's a known space, meaning that, and the definition of known, can I match it to my customer database? Do I know who's that user, or at least I know that this is a prospect, versus I have no clue if it's a user that is already a user or not, has an absolute different price for me. And in terms of, it's not really an advice, but a point that I think is important to make is that I think that every marketer should start knowing their numbers, or knowing that of my overall dollar spent, what's the percentage of impressions right now, or even looking at the last month? How much of my dollars did I put in an environment that I actually know who is that user, and I can correlate that to some type of an attribution system, or any way depending on your business. But this binary way of known versus unknown, to constantly have KPIs in a quarter by quarter basis or month by month. What's my percentage on the known side?
Yeah, that's a very good advice. I think it's something that publishers or kind of sell side, inventory supplier know much better, because they can see the difference in prices, right? Like, you know that there's a 2 to 3x difference between your Safari users and your Chrome users for the reason of identification or lack thereof, right? But I agree with you, it's not something that the buyers have necessarily digged into, because they have more access to more impressions they can buy anyway, right? But all those impressions are not necessarily worth the same price, and I think it's a great advice that you're given. Tal, thank you very much for that discussion. It was super interesting. Really appreciate your enthusiasm and your insights. And yeah, looking forward to episode 2 maybe when we go for the second season. Thank you again for your time, and listeners and watchers. Thank you for sticking with us.
Thank you.
And we'll see you all next week. Bye bye.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.